1. Project MKUltra. During the Cold War, the CIA carried out one of the most disturbing experiments ever conducted, Project MKUltra. The goal was simple and terrifying: to control the human mind. To get there, agents began testing drugs like LSD, hypnosis, and extreme psychological techniques. But the most shocking part wasn't the methods, it was the people involved. Many of the victims had no idea they were being used as test subjects. Ordinary citizens, hospital patients, even government employees were exposed to powerful substances without their consent. Some were given high doses of hallucinogens for days at a time. Others were subjected to intense interrogations and psychological manipulation. The effects were devastating: paranoia, mental breakdowns, a complete loss of identity. There are reports of people who never fully recovered, and for a long time, all of it remained hidden. Documents were destroyed. Records were erased. But years later, part of the truth came to light. Official hearings confirmed that the program was real and that it crossed every ethical line. Even so, many details remain unknown, because the most unsettling question isn't just what was done, but how far they went, and if they ever truly succeeded in controlling the human mind. Did they ever really stop? 2. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study. In 1932, in the United States, one of the most shocking medical experiments in history began: the Tuskegee Syphilis Study. It was presented as a program offering free medical care to poor men. But that was a lie. Hundreds of African American men were recruited without being told they had syphilis. They believed they were receiving treatment, but in reality, they were being observed. Even after penicillin was discovered as an effective cure, researchers chose not to treat the patients. The goal was to study how the disease progressed in the human body, all the way to death. For decades, these men endured severe complications: chronic pain, blindness, neurological damage, and ultimately, death. And perhaps the most disturbing part, many of them never knew the truth. The study only came to an end in 1972 after a leak exposed it and shocked the world. The US government was forced to admit what had happened, but by then, the damage was already done. Families were torn apart, lives were lost, and trust in the medical system was deeply shaken. Because this case raises a haunting question: how far can someone go in the name of science? 3. Unit 731. During World War II, Unit 731 operated in secrecy in the region of Manchuria, under the command of physician Shiro Ishii. Officially, it was a research facility. In reality, it was something far darker. Prisoners, including civilians, were used as human test subjects in extreme experiments. They were exposed to dangerous diseases, freezing temperatures, and inhumane conditions, all in the name of studying the limits of the human body. No anesthesia, no consent. Some experiments involved exposure to biological agents. Others pushed the body's physical endurance to its absolute edge. The objective? To develop biological weapons, and to understand just how much the human body could endure. Thousands of people died as a result of these experiments, and for a long time, it was all kept hidden. After the war, many of those involved were never prosecuted. In exchange for their scientific data, they were granted immunity. Yes, immunity. Which means much of what happened there was never fully revealed. And maybe it never will be. Because the most disturbing part isn't just what was done, but that it was done in the name of science and hidden from the world, as if those lives never mattered. 4. The Stanford Prison Experiment. In 1971, a psychological study conducted at Stanford University would become one of the most disturbing experiments in history: the Stanford Prison Experiment. The goal seemed simple: to simulate a prison. Volunteers were divided into two groups: guards and prisoners. Everything was supposed to take place in a controlled environment for just 2 weeks. But within days, things spiraled out of control. The guards began to abuse their authority. Humiliation, psychological punishment, and cruel behavior emerged Psurat almost immediately. And the most unsettling part? They weren't violent people. They were ordinary college students. The prisoners, on the other hand, began showing signs of extreme stress, anxiety, even emotional breakdowns. The line between reality and simulation quickly disappeared. The experiment, originally planned to last 14 days, was shut down after just 6 because it had gone too far. The lead researcher, Philip Zimbardo, later admitted he had lost control of the situation, and it raises a disturbing question. If ordinary people can become cruel in just a matter of days, what does that say about human nature? Because sometimes, the real experiment doesn't reveal science, it reveals who we truly are. 5. Project Bluebird. At the dawn of the Cold War, before MKUltra, the CIA launched a secret program known as Project Bluebird. The objective? To figure out how to control the human mind during interrogations. Agents tested techniques like hypnosis, extreme isolation, and the use of chemical substances to break a person's psychological resistance. The idea was simple, but deeply unsettling. Make someone obey, against their own will. The experiments were conducted in total secrecy. In many cases, the participants didn't even know they were being used. Some were subjected to prolonged periods of sensory deprivation. Others endured intense interrogations designed to completely disorient the mind. Over time, even those involved began to feel uneasy about the results, because it wasn't just about extracting information, it was about reshaping behavior. Project Bluebird eventually evolved into even more ambitious programs, like MKUltra. But much of what happened was never fully revealed. Documents were erased, records disappeared, and that leaves a haunting question. If this was only the beginning, how far did these experiments really go? 6. The Philadelphia Experiment. During World War II, one of the strangest stories ever linked to military experiments began to circulate. The Philadelphia Experiment. According to various accounts, the US Navy attempted to make a ship invisible to radar, and possibly to the human eye. The vessel at the center of the story was supposedly the USS Eldridge. The idea was to use powerful electromagnetic fields to bend light around the ship. But something went wrong. Witnesses claimed the ship vanished, surrounded by a greenish haze, only to reappear minutes later in a different location. That alone would be bizarre. But what came next is even more unsettling. There are reports describing crew members suffering severe effects: disorientation, memory loss, and, in the most extreme versions of the story, bodies allegedly found partially fused with the ship's structure. Officially, the Navy denies that any such experiment ever took place, and many consider the entire story to be nothing more than a myth. Still, certain details have kept people questioning it for decades. Because if it's just a story, why has it persisted for so long? And if it isn't, what really happened on that ship that day? 7. The Monster Study. In 1939, a psychological experiment conducted in the United States became known as the Monster Study, and the name says a lot. The study involved orphaned children who had no idea they were part of an experiment. They were divided into 2 groups. One group received positive reinforcement, praise, and encouragement when they spoke. The other was constantly criticized, harshly corrected, shamed for small mistakes, made to believe there was something wrong with the way they spoke. The goal was to find out whether stuttering could be induced through psychological pressure, and in some cases, it worked. Children who had previously spoken normally began to develop deep insecurity, anxiety, and speech difficulties. But the effects didn't stop there. Some carried those emotional scars for the rest of their lives. And the most disturbing part, all of it was done in the name of science, without consent, without protection. For years, the study remained hidden, until it was finally exposed and shocked the world. Because it raises a difficult question. How much damage can be done with nothing more than words? And how far is someone willing to go to prove a theory? 8. Operation Sea Spray. In 1950, the US Navy carried out a secret experiment known as Operation Sea Spray. The objective was to test how vulnerable a city might be to a biological attack. But there was a disturbing detail. The public had no idea. Off the coast of San Francisco, military ships began releasing bacteria into the air, creating an invisible mist that drifted across the city. Thousands of people were exposed. No warning, no consent. At the time, scientists believed the microorganisms were harmless. They were wrong. Soon after, local hospitals reported an unusual rise in rare infections. At least one person died. And the most unsettling part, no one knew it was part of an experiment. The truth only came out years later, when documents were finally revealed. The government acknowledged the test, but claimed it hadn't anticipated serious consequences. Even so, the incident raised a chilling question. How far are governments willing to go to test their own theories? Because on that day, an entire city became a laboratory without ever knowing. 9. Project Stargate. During the Cold War, the United States explored an idea that sounded like pure science fiction, using psychic abilities for espionage. This secret program became known as Project Stargate. The goal was to train individuals to perform what was called remote viewing, the ability to describe places, objects, or events from a distance, using only the mind. No physical contact, no technology, just thought. The CIA and the US military invested years into the project. Individuals believed to have psychic sensitivity were tested in attempts to access classified information, enemy bases, military operations, hidden targets. Some reports claimed that certain participants delivered surprisingly accurate results. But there was a problem. The results were inconsistent, unreliable, difficult to verify, and yet the program continued for years. It was officially shut down in the 1990s. The reason? A lack of credible scientific evidence. But here's the unsettling part. If it didn't work, why was it taken so seriously for so long? And more importantly, what if it did? At least sometimes? Or what if some of the findings were never revealed at all? 10. The Soviet Sleep Experiment. In the 1940s, one of the most disturbing stories ever linked to human experimentation began to circulate: the Soviet Sleep Experiment. According to the account, Soviet scientists kept 5 prisoners awake for days, using an experimental gas. At first, everything seemed under control. But as the days passed, something began to change. The participants started showing extreme behavior, paranoia, hallucinations, and a complete loss of sanity. They whispered to the walls, avoided contact, and developed an intense, unexplained fear of sleep. After days without rest, the situation grew even more unsettling. The prisoners themselves began begging to stay awake, as if sleep was something worse than exhaustion. When researchers finally opened the chamber, what they found shocked even those involved. The survivors didn't want to leave, and some of them seemed no longer the same. Officially, there's no evidence this experiment ever took place. Many consider it nothing more than a legend. But it raises an unsettling question. Why do stories like this continue to spread? And more importantly, why do they feel so believable?